The most courageous martyr. That is Tertullian, writing in Carthage in his treatise on the soul, within about a decade of her death. Her name was Vibia Perpetua. She was 22, from a family with money and education behind it, and nursing an infant son when Roman authorities arrested her in Carthage in the spring of the year 203, or possibly the year before. In the weeks between the arrest and the execution, she wrote down what was happening to her. That document survives. It is the earliest known prose written by a Christian woman, not a later account of her, not a legend that grew around her, but her own sentences, in her own order, running up to the point where she stopped writing. Almost nothing written by a private person in the 3rd century survived. So how did the prison notebook of a condemned 22-year-old come through 18 centuries intact? The answer turns out to be the opposite of what most people assume, and it is the reason this document is worth the next quarter of an hour. Carthage, in the year 203, was the administrative center of Roman North Africa, with a Christian community large enough to have its own bishop, its own deacons, and its own arguments. At the time of her arrest, Perpetua was a catechumen, under instruction, preparing for baptism, not yet baptized. So were most of those taken with her: Saturninus, Secundulus, Revocatus, who was enslaved, and Felicitas, who was enslaved and 8 months pregnant. Their teacher, Saturus, was not there when the others were arrested, and afterward turned himself in. Notice the range in that list. A woman of the propertied class and 2 enslaved people, arrested together and named together in the same document. The Roman record almost never does that. It preserves the powerful and dissolves everyone else into categories. The reason for the arrest is less settled than most accounts suggest. Later Roman sources describe an order from the Emperor Septimius Severus forbidding conversion to Christianity. No such order survives anywhere, and historians, including Timothy Barnes, have questioned whether it existed. What the document records is narrower and firmer. It records a charge, being a Christian, and it names the man with the power to act on it. Hilarianus was a procurator, exercising the authority of life and death, because the sitting proconsul, Minucius Timinianus, had died in office and the post was vacant. That detail changes the shape of the story. This was not an empire-wide machine grinding into motion. It was a provincial official holding temporary powers he had not been appointed to hold, deciding what to do about a group of local converts. Whatever the legal basis, it produced a document with no real parallel. When Peter Drunk published his study of the women writers of the Western tradition through Cambridge University Press in 1984, he had to decide where that tradition begins. He began it here, in a Carthaginian prison in the year 203. The book covers 11 centuries. Perpetua is the first name in it. Here is what she recorded about the prison, in her own hand. She had never known darkness like it. The heat was severe from how many bodies were pressed into the space. The soldiers handled them roughly. And underneath all of it was the fact that her baby was not with her. 2 deacons, Tertius and Pomponius, paid a bribe to have the group moved for a few hours into a better part of the building. In that window, she nursed her son, who was weak with hunger, and asked her mother and her brother to look after him. Then she arranged for the child to stay with her. And she writes that she immediately grew strong, the anxiety lifted. The prison became a palace to her, and she would rather have been there than anywhere else. Read that again. She is under sentence of death in a dark and overcrowded cell, and she calls the place a palace because her baby is in it. That is not the register of a martyrdom legend. Legends do not think about breastfeeding. Her father came 4 times. The first was before her baptism, an argument about a pitcher. She asked whether the vessel lying there could be called by any name other than what it was. He said no. And she said, in the 1885 translation by Robert Ernest Wallace, which is the one to look up if you want to check this, "Neither can I call myself anything else than what I am, a Christian." He threw himself at her as though he would tear her eyes out and left. The second time, he came from the city worn down. He kissed her hands. He threw himself at her feet. He begged her to have pity on his gray hairs. And he stopped calling her daughter. He called her lady. The third time was at the hearing. He appeared holding her baby and pulled her back from the step, asking her to have pity on the child. When she refused to sacrifice, Hilarianus ordered her father thrown down and beaten with rods. She writes that she grieved for him as though she herself had been struck. She is watching her father beaten because of a decision she made and will not reverse. She records it in 2 sentences and softens neither. No writer in the ancient world handles a moment like that with less decoration. The fourth time, shortly before the games, he tore out his own beard and threw it on the ground, and said things she describes as capable of moving all creation. Then a detail the retellings almost always leave out. After the sentence, she sent the deacon Pomponius to ask her father for the baby back. Her father refused. She records that the child then stopped wanting the breast and that her breasts stopped paining her. That is the last we hear of her son in her own writing. Not a farewell, a physical fact recorded without comment, which is very often how people write about the thing they cannot look at directly. The argument between daughter and father did not stay inside the document. 2 centuries later, Augustine of Hippo was preaching on their feast day, most likely in the basilica at Carthage, built over the burial site. At least 3 of those sermons survive, numbered 280, 281, and 282. And Sermon 281 works directly through the father material, the pleading, the beating, her refusal. A private argument in a provincial prison had become a set text a bishop preached on annually for decades. The middle of her account is given over to 4 dreams, which she records in detail and interprets herself. In the first, her brother suggests she ask for a vision, since she is in a position to be granted one. She agrees, and what she sees is a ladder. It runs to heaven. It is bronze, and it is so narrow that only one person can climb at a time. Iron weapons are fixed along both sides, swords, lances, hooks, daggers, so that anyone climbing carelessly would be torn. At the foot of it, a dragon lies waiting. Saturus goes up first and calls back a warning. She puts her foot on the dragon's head and uses it as the first step. At the top, there is a garden, and a white-haired man dressed as a shepherd, milking sheep. He gives her curds. She wakes, still tasting a sweetness she says she cannot describe. She and her brother concluded from this that she was going to die. The second and third visions belong together. They concern Dinocrates, her brother, dead at 7 years old of a cancer that ate away his face. She sees him first in a dark place, filthy and parched, the wound still on his face, beside a pool whose rim is higher than he is tall. He reaches up and cannot drink. She prays for him. In the second vision, the place is bright. He is clean and clothed. The wound has become a scar. The rim has come down to the height of his navel, and beside it is a cup that does not empty. He drinks, then goes off to play the way children do. Whatever anyone makes of the theology, the observation is exact. The pool does not vanish. The rim comes down. The fourth vision comes the day before the games. The deacon, Pomponius, leads her into the middle of the arena and tells her not to be afraid. She expects wild animals. Instead, an Egyptian fighter comes out against her. She is stripped for the contest, and she records that she became a man. Her seconds rub her with oil as they would an athlete. A figure of enormous height presides, carrying a rod and a green branch hung with golden apples. She takes hold of the Egyptian's head, throws him down, treads on him, takes the branch, and walks toward the gate of life. On waking, she understood that she was not going to fight beasts. She was going to fight the devil, and she was going to win. The line about becoming a man is the most discussed sentence in the document, and it has been read in very different directions. Augustine, preaching in the 4th century, built a contrast between weakness and strength framed in terms of gender. Brent Shaw at Princeton in 1993 and Barbara Gold in her 2018 book for Oxford read it instead against Roman arena convention, where fighters were stripped and oiled as standard practice. Those are published positions, and not a question a documentary settles. The Dinocrates visions had a documented afterlife. Augustine took them up in a treatise on the origin of the soul, because people were using them in a live argument about whether the unbaptized dead could be helped by prayer. His response is worth being precise about. He did not suppress the text. He was preaching on it in the same period. He set a limit on it, pointing out that the account is not canonical scripture, and hedging on what Perpetua, or whoever wrote it, had meant. A young woman's dream about her dead brother had become load-bearing in a doctrinal dispute and required the most influential theologian in the Latin West to define in writing how much authority it carried. Felicitas was enslaved. She was 8 months pregnant when she was arrested and close to term by the time the games approached. Roman law forbade the execution of a pregnant woman, which meant that unless she gave birth first, she would be held back and then put to death separately, later, among people convicted of ordinary crimes. The account is specific about what frightened her, and it was not the arena. It was being left behind by the others. 3 days before the games, the group prayed together about it. Her labor started immediately afterward. It was difficult, as an 8th-month delivery would be, and one of the prison staff heard her and asked what she thought she would do when she was thrown to the beasts, if this was how she handled it now. Her reply is preserved. She said that what she was suffering now, she was suffering herself, and that then there would be another in her who would suffer for her. She gave birth to a daughter. A woman of the Christian community in Carthage took the child and raised her as her own. Consider what has been preserved here and what usually is not. An enslaved woman in a provincial prison in the year 203. We have her name, her physical circumstances, what a guard said to her, and what she said back. The Roman documentary record contains, for practical purposes, nothing else like it, and her name did not fade afterward. By the year 344, the 7th of March appears in the calendar of martyrs publicly commemorated at Rome, with Felicitas and Perpetua entered under it. That is 150 years, and the width of the Mediterranean, from a cell in Carthage to the official calendar of the capital. The two names have stayed coupled ever since. Both women are still named together in the Roman canon of the Mass, among a very short list of women commemorated there by name. Her own writing stops here. She ends her section by saying that she has written this much herself, several days before the games, and that whoever wishes may write about the games themselves. Then it stops. That is the most important structural fact in the document, and it is why historians take this text seriously when they take very little else in the genre seriously. She marks her own boundary. Everything after it comes from an unnamed editor who says he was there. To know where her voice ends, you do not need a scholar. She tells you. What the editor records is this. The games were held for the birthday of Geta, the younger son of the emperor Septimius Severus. At the gate, the prisoners were ordered into costume, the men as priests of Saturn, the women as priestesses of Ceres. They refused, and the tribune gave way. The crowd then demanded they be scourged as they passed the line of beast fighters, and they were. A boar, a bear, and a leopard were put in against the men. For the two women, a cow was specially provided. Perpetua was thrown first. She landed on her back. And what the editor records her doing next is pulling her torn tunic back over her thigh. She was thinking about her modesty rather than her pain. Then she asked for a pin and put her loosened hair back up, because it was not fitting, she thought, for a martyr to die looking as though she were in mourning. Then she saw Felicitas on the ground, went over, took her hand, and lifted her to her feet. Pulled back to the gate, she asked when they were going to be led out to the cow. She had been so deep in ecstasy that she did not know it had already happened, and did not believe it until she was shown the marks on her body. She told a catechumen named Rusticus and her brother to stand firm, to love one another, and not to be shaken by what they had seen. At the end, the condemned were called into the middle of the arena so the crowd could watch the swords go in. They stood and walked there on their own and kissed one another first. The gladiator assigned to Perpetua was inexperienced. His first stroke went between her ribs, and she cried out. And then, with his hands still wavering, she took hold of it and guided it to her own throat. That account was written down almost immediately, and it never went underground. A basilica was built over the burial site outside Carthage. On the morning of the 29th of March, 1907, an archaeologist named Alfred Louis Delattre, excavating there, lifted a 6th century marble plaque carrying the martyrs' names, and published the find that year in the Proceedings of the French Academy of Inscriptions. The text itself came down through 9 Latin manuscripts and 1 Greek. That count is from Thomas Heffernan's critical edition, published by Oxford University Press in 2012. So, the question from the beginning: how did it survive? Not by being hidden, not by being buried in a jar and dug up 18 centuries later. It survived by the least dramatic method available. People read it out loud, in public, on the 7th of March, year after year, for centuries. Augustine found it necessary to remind them in writing that it was not scripture, which tells you how highly they held it. The copies exist because congregations wanted copies. There is a version of history that treats survival as escape, the manuscript that got away, the truth that slipped through. This is the other kind, and it gets told far less often. This text lasted because it was useful to people who were not hiding it from anyone. And what lasted in the middle of it is not a monument. It is a young woman noticing that her prison felt like a palace once her baby was in it, and grieving over her father's gray hair, and measuring how far the rim of a pool had come down. Of everything in her own words, the bronze ladder, her brother at the water, or the way she wrote about her father, which one would you have wanted the world to keep? 18 centuries on, her sentences are still in the order she put them in. Until next time, stay curious.